Welcome everybody to Question of the Week. This is a Facebook Live session in which I take on your science faith questions. Mondays, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 in the afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. My name is Dr. Fuz Rana. I'm Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. Check out our website, www.reasons.org. Ideally, we want to run this broadcast every Monday morning here in the Pacific time zone, but unfortunately, I've been rather busy lately traveling and then also just a number of work assignments, so I haven't been able to keep up that weekly cadence of doing these Facebook Live broadcasts. The hope is that in the next few weeks, we'll get back on track and do these broadcasts again every week. But until then, we still are going to do the broadcast whenever we can, and this week's broadcast is based on questions that have come to me from three of my Facebook friends, Robert Medvey, Stephen Joyner, and David Benning, who all three sent me links to articles describing evidence for humans, quote unquote, in North America 130,000 years ago. This would have been 115,000 years earlier than anybody would have thought. And so this is considered to be a radical discovery, a radical concept. And so Robert and Stephen and David all wanted me to offer my perspective as an old earth creationist on this particular discovery. What does it mean for the evolutionary paradigm? What does it mean for the Reasons to Believe model for human origins? And finally, what does it mean in general for the creation evolution controversy? I'm going to take on all those three questions, but before I do that, I want to remind you that if you are watching this broadcast, please, in the comment section, make note of where you're watching from and who you are. That information, believe it or not, is very helpful for us as we plan future broadcasts. Also, if you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, either live or if you're watching it as a recorded video, please hit the like button or react to the video. It helps to elevate the profile of the broadcast, making it available to more people. And then finally, if you want to offer your comment or your perspective on this particular discovery, please go ahead and feel free to do so in the comment section. Go ahead and offer your perspective. It's okay if you don't agree with me. I want to create an environment on my Facebook page, both my public page and my private page, where people can feel free to discuss science faith issues without any kind of oversight or restriction. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this particular discovery without any further ado. This news item, or actually news items from a number of different outlets, were all based on a paper published in the journal Nature. And I've got the paper right here in front of me. This particular paper was published in the April 27th, 2017 issue of the journal Nature. Nature is one of the premier science journals in the world, and so we can rest assured that the data reported here has undergone a high level of critical scrutiny, that this work has passed through the peer review process. And I think this is very important because this particular discovery we're going to talk about is highly controversial. It's going to be highly contentious. And this work is based on a find in 1992 by Caltrans when they were doing some road work in San Diego County. They basically stumbled upon a set of mastodon remains that are now referred to as the Cerruti mastodon finds, or Cerruti mastodon site, after one of the scientists who was the first to go in and investigate this particular find. Though it was, again, discovered in 1992 and the mastodon remains were characterized shortly thereafter, we have not had any information about the date of these mastodon remains. The scientists tried initially to do radiocarbon dating on the mastodon remains using the collagen associated with the mastodon bones as a source of carbon. But there wasn't enough collagen associated with the bones for them to do carbon-14 dating. And so they tried on 2 separate occasions, and the dating failed. They later on tried luminescence dating, which also failed. And recently they did work where they employed uranium series disequilibrium methods and were able to date the remains at 130,000 years in age, which explains why the radiocarbon dating methods failed. At this particular site, they found, again, the remains of a single mastodon, but what was really interesting is that the femur, or the femurs of the mastodon, as well as some of the molars, showed a spiral fracture pattern, and that's a type of pattern that would be produced if the bones were fresh and they were struck with a rock, with what's called a hammerstone. Moreover, they found 5 or 6 cobbles. These are rocks that appear to be used as tools, hammerstones and anvils, that look like they were the stones that were used to strike the mastodon remains. They could actually see microscopic details on the stones consistent with it being used as a hammerstone. They also saw markings on the stones indicating that the hammerstones and the anvil stones were used to strike one another on occasion. And also the arrangement of the bones with these cobbles all suggested to these researchers that there was, quote-unquote, human activity at this site, that this was an archaeological site where these remains were manipulated after the animal had died. They went into the lab and were able to replicate the fracturing pattern on the bones by looking at fresh elephant bones and fresh cattle bones, where again they would use stones striking those bones, producing similar types of spiral patterning. And they could also again see similar types of marks on these hammerstones in lab experiments, all of which suggest that again there was human activity at these sites. The researchers point out that there are comparable sites in the Midwest that are interpreted as evidence for human activity. Therefore, they argue it looks as if there were humans, quote unquote, here in the Americas about 130,000 years ago. Of course, this then raises the question, what was the identity of the humans? And this is where I think it's very important for the uninitiated to understand how the term human is being used here. In a scientific sense, the term human doesn't refer to us, Homo sapiens sapiens, modern humans. It refers to any primate that has the capacity to walk erect. This would include the Australopithecines, the genus Paranthropus, the Habilines, the Erectines, Neanderthals, and other archaic Homo sapiens like Homo heidelbergensis and Rhodesian man. They are all referred to as humans, including, again, modern humans as well. And when scientists are referring to us, to modern humans, they'll use the term modern humans, or they'll use the term Homo sapiens sapiens. So what they're just referring to here are hominids, not modern humans. The evidence is very clear that modern humans did not begin their migration out of Africa until about 50 to 60,000 years ago. Moreover, the types of tools here are completely inconsistent with what you would expect modern humans to be using. So the inference here is that these are most likely Neanderthals, or perhaps the Denisovans. Though we have no fossil evidence for Denisovans, we do have DNA evidence that these hominids existed. They are distinct from Neanderthals and from modern humans. Both the Denisovans and Neanderthals were in Siberia, and so it's not that it's not that much of a stretch to think that they would have migrated from Siberia, from Asia into the Americas, assuming that there would have been a land bridge available. And lo and behold, 130,000 years ago, sea levels were low enough that there would have been a land bridge. So it looks as if, quite likely, Neanderthals and maybe Denisovans made their way into the Americas. Now, it's not clear at this point, since we're dealing with one archaeological site, it's not clear at this point whether this was just a small group of Neanderthals that made their way into the Americas and then died off. Clearly, they died off well before modern humans made their way into the Americas, somewhere between 15 and 13,000 years ago. But it's not clear how prominent the Neanderthal presence was here in the Americas. It very well could be this was just a single colonization event where, again, the members of that group eventually died out, a one-off event, if you will. Now, this again is a remarkable find. It is completely unexpected, and you would think that perhaps this would have profound implications for human evolutionary models. In fact, Christopher Stringer, a well-respected anthropologist at the Natural History Museum in London, said this in an article published in New Scientist: "We often hear statements in the media that a new study changes everything we knew about human evolution." He goes on to say, if this result stands up to scrutiny, it does indeed change everything we thought we knew about the earliest human occupation in the Americas. Other researchers have said this. John Erlandson of the University of Oregon: "These claims are extraordinary and the potential implications are staggering." Dennis Jenkins of the University of Oregon says this: "The work is mind-boggling." But in spite of these, again, grandiose reactions to this discovery has, at the end of the day, no bearing on the question of human evolution one way or the other. It just simply is raising the possibility that Neanderthals made their way into the Americas. And by the way, there are still some archaeologists that are skeptical of this find. And the reason why they are skeptical is because the types of tools that would have been used at this site, the cobbles, are very unsophisticated. They're not the types of tools you would expect Neanderthals or Denisovans to actually employ. And so this raises questions in the minds of some archaeologists as to whether or not this is a bona fide archaeological site. In my opinion, it is. I think the data is pretty compelling towards that end. But again, there is some controversy. Now, what does this mean for creation models for the origin of humanity, specifically an old Earth creationist model like the one we employ here at Reasons to Believe? Again, it means virtually nothing to creation models as well. Our model would argue Neanderthals, like the other hominids, are creatures that God created that existed and then went extinct. They had limited intelligence and emotional capability, but they lacked the image of God. The biological similarities between humans and the hominids reflect, in our view, common design, not common descent. So we are skeptical of the claims about human evolution. We look at Adam and Eve as the first human beings created in God's image as de novo creations, distinct from the other hominids biologically and behaviorally. And we would argue that this particular find has no bearing on that view whatsoever. It just simply raises the possibility that Neanderthals had migrated and occupied a biogeographical area much greater than just simply Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. It might have very well included the Americas. So I think the jury, to some degree, is still out on this particular claim, but I think the evidence that the researchers present in the Nature paper is compelling that there was some kind of hominid activity in the Americas much earlier than anybody thought. That modern humans very well may not have been the first quote-unquote humans in a scientific sense to make our way into the Americas. We may have been preceded by hominids that were here and most likely died out. So again, a fascinating discovery to be certain, but has little bearing on human origins models. Where I do think this particular discovery is actually significant for the creation-evolution debate is it highlights the fact that intelligent design can properly be part of the construct of science. And the reason why this is important, because when Christian apologists like me present a case from biology for God's handiwork in living systems, when we would argue that the origin of life and the design of life and even the history of life bear God's fingerprints, we oftentimes are rebuffed by skeptics and by scientists, not because the scientific evidence for design is lacking, not because the challenges that we level against the evolutionary paradigm are deficient. It's because we are violating one of the chief tenets of science, namely methodological naturalism, which argues you cannot appeal to the work of a creator to explain any feature in the universe, including the origin, the design, and the history of life. But I would argue that this study actually illustrates that science has the toolkit to detect the work of intelligent agency and even to give us information about the nature of that intelligence. It's interesting that the evidence that these researchers used was the distribution of the bones and the cobbles. It was the spiral patterns on the bones, the markings on the cobbles that suggested to them the work of intelligent agency. In fact, they even went into the lab and they replicated the process so that they could again show that intelligent agency is the explanation for the patterns that they saw at this archaeological site. They even ruled out natural process explanations, the activity of, let's say, scavengers, as an explanation for the patterns that you see on the bones. And it's interesting because this is the very type of argument that I make in 3 books, Origins of Life, The Cell's Design, and Creating Life in the Lab, for the idea that God played a role in creating the very first life on Earth and producing the fundamental designs of biochemistry. In my book, The Cell's Design, I talk about intelligent design patterns that we can develop from the way in which human designers carry out our work. And we see those same kind of patterns and features in biochemical systems. It's a marker for design. I talk about the fact that in creating life in the lab, when we go in the lab and we try to create life, just as these researchers went in the lab and tried to create those patterns in the bones, then we go in the lab and try to create life. It clearly indicates intelligent agency is required. And then we rule out natural process explanations, pointing that evolutionary models for the origin of life fall short. They cannot account for the origin and the design of life in its most basic form. It's the same type of reasoning. The only difference is that we appeal to the work of a supernatural agency as opposed to a natural agent, which is what these researchers are doing here. But it seems to me that methodological naturalism now imposes an artificial restriction on science, meaning that it is legitimate to say that scientific evidence can be used to detect the work of a creator. And so I would argue that this study has greater significance in that, again, it's highlighting that intelligent design has a proper place in science, and to dismiss scientific evidence for God's existence by hiding behind methodological naturalism is illegitimate for a skeptic or a scientist to do. Okay, with that, those are my thoughts on this particular discovery. I would again invite you to offer your comments, your insights. What do you think about this discovery? Do that in the comment section. Please react to this broadcast with the like button. Or if you don't like it, you can reflect the appropriate emoji. And then finally, go ahead and give us your name and where you're watching the broadcast from in the comment section. It's very, very helpful for us to have that information. Also, if you want to ask questions that would be considered for a future Question of the Week broadcast, please ask your question in the comment section. Give me a post on my private or public Facebook page, or you can private message me if you would prefer. I want you to know that I read every question and every comment that is posted on my Facebook page or sent to me privately. Unfortunately, I don't have time to individually respond to every one of those comments. So the purpose of this broadcast is to give me a chance to at least engage what I think to be questions that have a broad appeal and also are pertinent and germane and important to science faith conversations. It's not to say that if I don't respond to your question, that your question isn't important to me. Many times I'll actually decide on article topics for my blog, The Cell's Design, based on activity on my Facebook page. So I want you to know that I listen to you, that you are heard. I just wish that I could respond to you, but realistically, I can't respond to everybody. I just don't have time. But please don't view that as a sign of discourage or that I'm discouraging you from asking your questions or I'm uninterested. I am interested. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut things down for this week. And I just want to remind you that the more that we know about science, the more we have reasons to believe. God bless all of you. Thank you for your interest in my ministry and the work here at Reasons to Believe. We value your partnership and your interest. Again, God bless you. Until next time.